And welcome to the latest edition of the Hillingdon Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust podcast. I am Jonathan Lowe from the communications team, and I'm delighted to say we've got a rather special podcast for you this week, as I'm joined by a famous landscape architect and gardener who's exhibited and won at the Royal Chelsea Flower Show on several occasions, and designed gardens for royalty, as well as other rich and famous people, and has now played an instrumental role in the creation of the Jubilee Garden here at Hillingdon Hospital. So without further ado, warm welcome to Tom Stewart-Smith. And Tom is here to tell us all about the garden and what it means for patients at the Trust. Tom, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. How are you doing today?
Very good. Yes, it's a beautiful sunny day, which makes a change from what we've been served up recently. So all is good with the world.
Indeed. Good. Nice to hear. And let's just start things off by asking you, how did you get involved with the rehab garden, and why you agreed to do it?
Well, originally, Shirley, I think, got in touch with me from the charity team, and I think she knew about my work maybe through the garden I made her at Horatios in Stanmore. I'm relatively local to Hillingdon. I live near Watford. So, and in fact, my wife, who's a doctor, she worked as junior doctor once at Hillingdon. So there was a sort of little bit of a connection. When we first got married, she was working at Hillingdon, and Shirley got in touch with us and said, would we be interested in helping with a garden in the rehab unit? And we'd actually just nearly come to the end of doing the Horatius Garden, I think, or just finished it. So it felt like a good time to take on another project of this sort. Occasionally we always have sort of one or two projects on the books at any one moment, which we're not really there to make money from. So and this seemed like a very nice one to get involved with.
Excellent. And can you, tell us a bit about the garden itself and kind of what it represents?
Well, I mean, when I first went there and had a look at the site, I was a mixture. I was quite taken aback by the condition of some of the buildings, that you experience. Like there's a corridor that faces onto the garden, which is in really quite poor condition, but the space itself was really interesting in that it's got this slightly dilapidated corridor on one side. It's got a good new modern building. A bit of a stack kind of building, but it's new and well made on one side. But then the real treat is that on one side it's got this mature planting of ash and oak trees, which gives it a sort of calmness and a real feeling of sort of breathing, that is very valuable. And I think particularly, patients in most hospitals now have so little connection with nature, and I think in the past, we've begun to forget how important that is to people. So immediately on seeing these trees, I thought, yeah, we can really do something here, which will be a breathing space for patients and for staff.
I guess, have you ever come across an area where you thought, no, I can't do anything with that, or is there always an opportunity to
occasionally I go to a garden that's had a lot of money spent on it, and somebody's just not very happy with it, and they say, can you redo this? And I just feel, too much has been done already. This is just too depressing to undo this. And it's just too much. There's too much money and not enough sense, kind of thing. But you wouldn't say that about what we saw at Hillingdon before we started. One quite good thing in a way was that there wasn't much soil. It was just a gravel, heap of gravel. So we were starting from a very simple base, and one of the things that I immediately saw, that because it's largely a south-facing garden, is that we could make a Mediterranean garden here, for which one doesn't actually need that much soil. In fact, too much soil is not really a very good thing in a way, because it makes plants grow too lush, and then they get fungal infections and things like that. It's just like patience, really, Well, actually, no, you're not fussed if patients grow very strongly, do you? But better abandon that little parallel metaphor story pretty quickly. But I just everything about the site, its proximity to the ward, its south-facing aspect, its connection to the trees, just seemed like had a positive wind behind it, and also the team, with Shirley and David sort of organising it, had so much enthusiasm and will to make this happen. That was my initial thought. I mean, I have to admit, sort of coming to the NHS from outside, I thought, well, maybe this is going to be a bit bureaucratic, a bit slow, a bit difficult, and it hasn't been any of that, which is a great testament to the people involved.
Good. That's obviously very nice to hear. And I mean, I was going to ask you about some of the challenges that you face, but from the
Mm.
sounds of it, it's been quite a sort of smooth journey from start to where you are now. Then.
Yes, it has. It has really. I mean, there was a little asbestos scare at one stage, but that proved to be a bit of a not too much of a problem. And I mean, it's a site with lots of services going through it. It's got its own challenges, but I would say it was really very, very straightforward. It's one of the more straightforward projects we've done recently, and I think we set our sights very realistically. There are no moving parts. There are no water features. Well, that immediately makes it, much more straightforward. I think we were concentrating on the core things that you need in a garden of this sort, which is quiet, green, a fair amount of flower, and I think one really important thing is change. A garden wants to have things that's happening pretty much all year round, so that in a way patients can measure the time they're spending in a unit by what's happening in the garden, and have a sense of the reality of nature outside the walls of the ward, as it were.
Sure, and I know you've already alluded to it, but the importance of having something like this at the hospital, or in a similar healthcare setting, and the importance of green spaces more generally for people, perhaps maybe even more since the COVID pandemic.
Yes, yes,
It's so
absolutely.
important, isn't it, to have these sort of these spaces almost literally to breathe, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I've been particularly conscious of this because my wife Sue wrote this extraordinary book, which ended up, I mean, it's now in 18 languages. A little punt for
Wow.
her book called The Well-Gardened Mind, which was all about the benefits of nature and gardening, both for gardeners, but also for people who are engaging with it in a slightly more passive way, perhaps, which would be most of the patients on the Alderbourne ward. And I think that we underestimate the therapeutic value of beauty in its own right. And I think this is something that the NHS has begun to realize in the last 10 years, that it's actually really counterproductive to have wards that are drab and windowless and disconnected to nature. All the research shows that if you give people a view of a tree, or enable them to have some contact with nature, then recovery times, health outcomes are just much better. And this is something that isn't just applicable to hospitals. It's applicable to life out there on the street. That if you have a tree in your street, people behave better. I mean, it's just weird, isn't it? But it's just, actually, if you think about it, it's so bleeding obvious, that we are civilized by nature and by beauty. And we're also, it also has this extraordinarily emollient effect on our psyche, and a healing effect on our minds as well. And this is, people are going through incredibly stressful and difficult times if they're patients in hospital, and often, sadly, if they're working in a hospital too. And anything that one can do to give these moments of beauty and hope are, I think, incredibly important, and not just an add-on. That they should be a key part of the whole therapeutic and healing process, I think.
Yes, very much so. And in terms of patients who are perhaps listening to the podcast and are maybe going to be going out to visit the garden in the near future, what sort of do you hope patients will feel when they're visiting the garden, and perhaps what do you hope that they'll take away from it when they leave the hospital and have the memory of going to the garden?
I mean, it's a very, very young garden at the moment. I hope that they will, if they go there, they'll always see something changing almost from day to day, different plants coming into flower. They'll see. I remember when I made this garden for Horatius at Stanmore, and actually, uncannily, a friend of mine broke his back and was in there for about 3 months, and I went to see him, and he said to me, Tom, it's not so much the garden, it's what the garden brings with it. And this is the socializing aspect of the garden, the insects, the birds, the wildlife it brings with it, just a sense of action. The trouble is that a hospital ward rotates around the consultant's ward round, doesn't it? I mean, that's the big event of the day, and maybe the meal. And this, okay, necessary and fundamental to getting better, but not exactly often the thing of great joy and hope. And I think that if you can bring these little moments of sort of anchoring hope into people's lives when they're starting to get better, then they have the potential to shift people's whole mindset from this injury or this predicament that I'm in is something that is the beginning of the end of hope, and the beginning and end of my life, to it just being something which I can get over and get out of, and is actually going to make me a stronger person, perhaps in some way, because my life will be more in balance, perhaps, and I can understand things that I couldn't have understood before. So I think sometimes we all know this, don't we? That little events, little positive things in our life, somebody giving you a word of encouragement, a little nudge in the right direction, or something that you see, maybe it's a book you read or a film, and maybe it's a garden that you see, has this ability just to sort of push you over into the edge, just through, and some of it may be through all the sort of, the endorphins that it releases, or all those, sort of, I don't know what half of them are, the serotonins and things that you would know much more about than me, that it actually releases because of the contact with the garden. So I would hope that somebody visiting the garden would come out of it and talk about that it's a great thing for the hospital to have done, that it makes you feel hopeful, not just about yourself, but about the way that we treat each other, the way we look after each other. That the garden is in itself a place that you have to look after. We've got a lovely gardener called Petronella who's looking after the garden really well at the moment. The fact that she is looking after the garden says something about our attitudes towards nature and towards people. And this is fundamental. And I think that people who are in the context of a cared for garden also feel cared for themselves. I think that it follows on from that.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I mean, just finally, I mean, is it do you drop in on your projects sort of from time to time in the months and years
Well, I'm
to
hoping
revival?
that we
Will be
haven't got a date for the opening yet. I'm
no.
definitely going to come back for that.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the gardens are like little babies, and I should say that this garden, I mean, was 90% of the work was done by Max Harriman, who works for me. I mean, he's been amazing on this. I just sort of and we made the plant list together, we planted it together. So I would say, in many ways, it's more his garden than it is mine. I've been in the very nice position of being, as it were, the sort of overall director of it. But Max has really done the lion's share of the work. Um, and so in a way, it's almost more appropriate for Max to come back and see it and see how it's getting on, and to be able to tweak it, and for it to be, one of his babies. Because if you're a designer like me, you in a very nice way, you do collect quite a lot of little babies, and if you spend your whole time looking around after them, then you can't get on to the next one. That's
Difficult to leave them, isn't it?
yes, yes.
And just one thing that springs to mind, any plants of any of the sort of keen gardeners out there, any plants that they should perhaps look out for, or
Well,
anything that you
something that
bought
will
in
be
was perhaps
coming
a
into
bit
flower,
unusual?
just coming into flower at the moment, would be Echinacea pallida, which is people are very familiar with these brightly coloured echinaceas, which are also a sort of herbal remedy. People take echinacea a lot for colds, don't they? I think. We use one called Echinacea pallida more than other ones because it's much longer lived and it's much more drought tolerant. A lot of echinaceas are not drought tolerant. We're using one that can cope with the kind of fairly tough conditions that they're going to be in that courtyard. And Echinacea pallida will be just coming into flower now. There's a little spurge we've used in the garden called, it's got a rather long name actually, Euphorbia seguriana var Nicisiana. And it's a little golden spurge that grows in places like Sicily on sort of open, barren hillsides. A lot of the plants we've used are Mediterranean plants which grow in much tougher conditions than we have in the so that they're really coming to Hillingdon for a holiday. They're going to have it pretty lush there, and we have to be careful not to overfeed them and overcosset them and overwater them. Otherwise, they'll want to go back to the Mediterranean via the compost heap, I'm afraid.
Yes, we'll certainly rather be at Hillingdon rather than Mediterranean, don't we?
Yeah.
Indeed. Great. I think that's covered everything then. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the garden at all, or anything that we've missed off at all?
Well, I think one thing I'd like to say about the garden is for me, one of the key things behind it is that it has a lot of variety. I couldn't tell you exactly how many plant species there are in it, but I would say, there are probably 60 or 70, something like that. And that does mean, that there's probably always something happening in it. Something is always changing. But also it means that it has a comparatively undesigned look to it in a way. And so I hope that means that people looking at it don't feel that they're oppressively in the designer's sort of story. They can find a narrative of their own. Of course, the thing for people who've seen the garden, the thing that's missing at the moment is the shelter that's going in the garden, which will bring much that'll be really important to bring a bit of shade and if it rains, to keep people out of the rain. And that's something that's going to arrive fairly soon, but we don't have an exact date for the arrival of that. But that will be an important addition to the garden, I think.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm sure people will be looking forward to seeing it, and hopefully it gives the patients plenty of benefits, and as we talked about, having that green space is hugely important. So thank you very much indeed then for your time, Tom, for today on the podcast, and hope you've enjoyed taking part.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you again, and we will be back with another podcast very soon, so keep an ay out for that. On Buzzsprout or wherever you get your podcasts. If you are listening and want to get involved in a future podcast, then just email thh-tr.communications@nhs.net. Thank you very much for listening today, and until the next time, goodbye.